Okay, so it looks like we're recording, and if you don't mind, I'm just gonna jump right in and ask you the questions.
Sure.
Okay. Question number one. Which class are you currently TAing, and which classes have you TA'd in the past?
Software analysis and testing, and it's my second time TAing that class, and it's the only class I've TA'd.
Okay. How often do you use Piazza as a TA?
Multiple times per day, all the time.
Mm-hmm. Do you usually use it on the mobile app or on the desktop?
I try and use it exclusively on the desktop. I do have the mobile app, but I've found the autocomplete has messed me up multiple times. And if you have something like LaTeX in a message, even though that's not that common for my class, the mobile just absolutely eats it. So I'm usually in front of a computer most of the day or not too far away from one. So I generally try and do Piazza completely from the computer if I can.
Mm-hmm. And what are the most common tasks that you use Piazza for?
Um, in the past, so last semester I did a lot of announcing things, but with the team we have this semester, my role is a little different. So I've always done a lot of responding to students, but this semester I'm doing much more responding and much less of the announcing type stuff. Um, we try and make sure that another student or an instructor answers all of the questions. We strive for no unresolved follow-ups, no unresolved questions. And so we try and make sure that most things get an answer within a day, if not a couple of hours, and a good amount of time in Piazza. A couple minutes here, a couple minutes there.
Okay, that's awesome. I wish all classes did that. What are the most useful features in Piazza for you?
Most useful in Piazza. I think that it does. I didn't understand how Piazza's workflow was designed to work for several semesters, but I think once I got it down that everything that's a question has an answer, and follow-up comments are really separate from the answer, and making sure that everything got an answer in the answer box, even if the answer was just see the follow-up comments. I think it made a lot more sense, and I was able to make much better use of it. Uh, I do like how the follow-up discussion works, and I like the concept of question and answer. I think it works well for a classroom type use of it. That, if you think of other internet forums, you don't really, in general, have the concept of an answer. I guess some things like Stack Exchange have the concept of upvoting a response and making it the answer, but there's less of a concept of here's a question, here's an answer. And I like that Piazza has that strong link, but you can also have ongoing discussion in addition to that. And I also like that you can disable that if you don't need a response, that you can convert things to notes.
Mm-hmm.
And I have done that on behalf of students many times where someone just throws out a generic comment and people may or may not want to follow up on it, but something that doesn't need a reply.
Okay. How do you decide which questions to answer and which ones to skip?
So the questions that I answer things that are logistics, if they're open, I generally try and answer them right away, with the exception being if there's no answer, if I don't know the answer or if it hasn't been decided yet, although I'll frequently even answer and say, that's still being decided. Like this semester, we've been trying to release assignments early, but we're also in the process of reworking a lot of our assignments. And so we'll have students saying, when is assignment 5 going to be available? And I told them, assignment 5 is getting a minor revision, but we haven't completed it yet. We anticipate having it in the next couple of days, kind of stuff. But I can't say we're releasing assignment 5 on Monday. That wouldn't be fair for me to say because it's still in progress and we haven't given ourselves a hard deadline.
So how do you then keep track of which questions are outstanding?
Well, we try and have everything, all the follow-ups resolved and all the questions have answers. So what I've found myself doing is looking at the Q&A summary screen in Piazza, which will tell you at a glance 3 things. It tells you if there's any unread posts, if there's any unresolved questions, and any unresolved follow-ups. And we use Piazza to track our office hours, and so when there's a scheduled office hours, there's going to be questions that are intentionally unresolved. But for example, we have office hours tonight, and I know that as of a little while ago, there's 3 questions in the office hours thread. So right now I know that the correct answer for how many unresolved follow-ups should be 3. If there's more than that, there's things that I should take a look at whether or not I answer them. But going back to your previous question, different TAs have generally had different involvement with different assignments, and especially with some of the reworked assignments, if I haven't had a chance to do them on my own, I'm less likely to answer a question and more likely to leave it to someone else. In some cases, I'll even jump over into our Slack channel and ping someone specific if it's someone who's usually not as on top of Piazza and say, hey, can you take a look at this? Wanting to make sure that we give a correct answer instead of, just giving an answer and then it turns out to be wrong.
Okay. What are some of the most frustrating features that you find in your current workflow as far as the Piazza interface is concerned?
So the most frustrating thing I find is something that happens when I'm on the other side, when I'm a student instead of a TA, but it's classes where there's not much of an effort to resolve things, and so you jump in there and it's hard to tell what questions are still outstanding. And it matters more for some classes and some types of material than others, but it can be very hard to figure out what is worth reading. And in a class that I TA, I try and read every single post, but I've been in some classes where there were 1,000 messages posted by the halfway point in the semester. And I've been in classes I've broken 2,000 for the semester. And, that's just the overall post count. That doesn't include any of the follow-up. And some of those have had extensive follow-ups. And so it can be really time-consuming to keep up with all of those, especially if the material tends to bring up questions that I don't care about. So in a class where I already know some of the material fairly well, I'm less likely to care about everything. And that's when unresolved things become an issue for me, is that the search is okay in Piazza, but I find the search is not great. And so it can be really hard sometimes to figure out to think there's 100 posts in the folder about this assignment. My question has probably been answered, and I'm going to feel stupid if I ask the question again because I'm pretty certain it's a duplicate, but I can't find it in search, and I don't really want to go through and read all 100 questions. Mm-hmm. So actually, thinking about it that way, I think the weakest feature in Piazza is the search. And I think part of it is the nature of questions, that in a lot of things we do, it doesn't really matter if you search, if you're just Googling something, like you want to know how to unclog a sink or something, there's a limited number of things that you can search for, and usually you get pretty good feedback. If I search for something, maybe I was too specific, there's no results, or maybe I didn't actually ask the question I thought I did, But it feels like with a lot of technical material, sometimes there's more options for words you could use. And it gets, with Piazza, it can get really hard to figure out from how they display search results too. If that you in some cases I've even had things where it's like I have seen the post answering my question and I don't remember where it is, and it can be maddening to try and find it again, especially if you have a thread that got started on talking about one thing and over time it diverged and your answer was somewhere over where after it diverged, but the search really highlights where the title and that kind of stuff, and so that's how I get. That's probably my biggest annoyance with Piazza.
Okay. What about from the instructor's end?
I think searching is still an issue
Mm-hmm.
on that side. Um, I search fairly frequently for student names, and you've probably noticed that Piazza makes it so student names are not selectable in a lot of posts.
Mm-hmm.
And so I end up having to retype names, and that's not a problem for short names, especially if they're uncommon. But sometimes you'll have a student who has a name in a culture that you're not familiar with. So it the letters don't look like they belong together, and it's hard to transpose it into the search field. And I find myself oftentimes searching for students, trying to get back to the introduction threads and figure out a little bit more about their background, because oftentimes students will ask a question, but there's an implied question behind the question. And the way you answer it, if someone is almost done with the program or has an extensive background in computer science, is probably completely different than how you answer the same question if this is their first class or if they're just getting started. Someone complaining about Proctor Track who's on class 7 has almost certainly taken a proctored exam before, and they're probably just being salty. And they may have some legitimate gripes about things, but oftentimes if they're complaining, they're, clearly they figured out how to deal with it. But someone where this is their first class, I may need to take some of their complaints more seriously because it could have a serious effect on their ability to actually show what they know.
Okay. Well, other than the search, are there any other features that you would like to see added to Piazza that you can think of?
I think some ability for bulk editing would be useful, and I say that for things to help classes get back under control if Piazza has gotten somewhat out of control, because I don't find managing Piazza to be hard if you keep on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
But if no one keeps on top of it, even for a week, it's very hard to go back and clean it up. And a good example is we had our midterm exam open last weekend, and we had a lot of questions specific to the midterm exam that came up. And we had said on several occasions that instructors wouldn't be answering material on the midterm exam after the exam opened. But we still got a lot of questions asking about midterm exam material that we couldn't answer. And at this point, our file is not comprehensive, so that material is done. There's no need to actually go back and answer unless if a student really wants an answer, I'm happy to do it. But I'm not going to spend 5 hours answering all of these questions that most students probably don't care about anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But and a lot of them are even tagged correctly, so I can get a nice filtered view and see all the midterm exam questions, but I still have to go in and resolve them all individually, where I can say Monday morning at 8 a.m., exam is closed, and if there's no extensions or anything like that, I can say, it's done. Everything relating to this exam should be resolved at this point. Start over clean. That, there might be some more things flagged as it that require attention when grades come back or something like that, but all of the questions relating to it should be done. And you have that, I think, with every assignment, too, where at some point, even if there's a bunch of unresolved stuff, you can say, it's over, no more need to it would be good to get all that stuff cleaned up. So I think some of those features could go a great way in making it so you could keep Piazza clean even if it got somewhat out of control.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Sorry, bear with me here for a second. Okay. Do you use the favorite posts feature at all?
I do use it. I'm a little bit cautious with it because I personally haven't experienced this, but I know several people who have had all of their favorites get lost.
Mm-hmm.
So I use it, but I try and keep it as a convenience as opposed to that I need to know this stuff in favorites. But I tend to use favorites for things that I want to make sure that I'm monitoring closely.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's a master thread for an assignment, I probably want to, anytime there's a new follow-up in it, I probably want to look at it. So I'll favorite that kind of stuff. I also tend to favorite posts where a student comments that say there's a problem with the assignment instructions. If it's a typo, I'll probably just go and fix it right away so I don't have to track it. But sometimes they'll say something like, the instructions for how to configure LLVM were completely unclear. I spent 3 hours Googling to try and figure it out. And so I will favorite that post because I'm not going to go I'm not going to go by myself and single-handedly rewrite that section. And even if the rest of the instructional team agreed that I should rewrite that section, I'm probably not going to just go and do something, pretty large like that right this second. But I favorite it so I make sure that I don't lose it, that I have something that I want to do in there.
So it's basically for things that are outstanding but not pressing.
Yeah, that's a good way to summarize it.
Okay. And the resolved, unresolved, you said you use it exactly as it's supposed to be used, to keep track of questions that need to be answered. And also, one last question. Does your class use a single thread for projects or for a particular project or a particular assignment, or do you guys use a folder?
We use folders. We do use single threads for a couple of things.
Mm-hmm.
We have a single thread for course resources,
mm-hmm.
which includes like the link to our virtual machine, but we also tend to link to some technical papers that people might find interesting. And that evolves as the semester goes, but we have a single post for that for the entire course because even though most of our assignments stand on their own, there's oftentimes overlap that in the sense of this textbook, if you're weak in this area, would be a good resource, and it's probably still a good resource for some other projects. We also do a consolidated post for all of the office hours. Each office hour gets its own post, but then we do one that's like a summary. So it has it's just a couple column table. It tells you the date, what we talked about at a high level. So oftentimes that's like midterm review or data flow assignment. Has a link to the original post, so you can see all the threads, the questions that were answered, and a link to see the video on YouTube Live. So you can get to all of them real quick in one spot. And we do the same thing for a consolidated grade statistics post. So we do post every time we release grades, but we've even stopped posting statistics on those posts about the grades, that we just keep one big table. So you get, mean, median, mode, and we actually give a ton of statistics like that, probably more than is useful to anyone. But it's just a table so you can see all the assignments, their weighting, and the class average so far. So it's all in one place, very easy to see. And we've found that just cuts a lot of questions, that people can get a very good summary of where they stand on the assignments. And then they're not asking us, can you clarify how I did on this assignment?
Okay. Well, Chris, thank you very much. I really appreciate you volunteering, and I guess since you are in the class, I could volunteer back some tokens, right? Because nobody else from the class seems to have volunteered. So let me just stop the recording here,
Okay.
and I'll paste them to you.